Welcome to MSP 1337. I'm your host, Chris Johnson, a show dedicated to cybersecurity challenges, solutions, a journey together, not alone. Welcome, everybody, to this episode of MSP 1337. It is coming out on time this week. Yay, yay, yay. So Jim, with Kinetic Technology Group, Jim, welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
I think you're probably pretty much everybody knows at this point that you're on like the monthly rotation to get at least one episode in. We're gonna have to start calling this the Chris and Jim also fireside chat. But um, part of the reason I've targeted you to be on the show is you've been heavily involved in the Trustmark and pursuing CIS controls. And when I look back on a lot of the episodes, they've often I don't want to say but we're attached to, but they've followed kind of the pattern of like a CIS control or a safeguard that's come up. I mean, we've even had an episode, I don't know that you were on it, but we talked just about MFA and what it means and why it's important to talk about that. What does it mean to have centralized management of accounts? And so as you're getting ready for your assessment or going through the assessment for the trust mark, and one of the things that, comes up for everybody that's going through it is how much evidence do I need? What kind of evidence are they looking for? How specific, how vague? I mean, it just goes on and on and on. And I don't want to say that it's exhausting, the questions. I think it's actually quite the opposite. It's actually refreshing to know that everybody is going through, whether it's the trust mark or the CIS framework or any framework for that matter, is it's not easy. And there are things that you are going to find that you don't know how to collect the evidence for, or you're not sure what evidence would look like. But I wanted to talk about it more from the perspective of, yes, we can collect evidence, but why are we doing that? What's important? Forget the trust mark for a second and like getting a badge, but like Jim, walk me through what got you on sort of the bandwagon of doing any framework or following any sort of rules that said, I want to have somebody assess whether or not we're doing this right.
Well, I can tell you from my side of things that it was a lack of discipline that I knew existed in my own routine. Okay, and I still see it, in every, in our secure outcomes within our peer group, and just people that aren't, I don't have time, or and it's just like I get honestly sick of hearing that, because it's like, look, you've got time to do all these other things, and just the couple of hours just to go down and give yourself a reality check of what you are and aren't doing. It's not that much time. It's just to start, right? Just to start and say, yes, we're doing this, whether or not you can prove it or not, but at least in your mind, you're like, okay, we're doing now. I need to go back and start doing these things. So for me, it was a lack of discipline and needing to be held accountable to something, right?
Right.
It started with a peer group member that was wanting the same thing, wanting to get with a group outside of peer group and with a group of people that were striving to um, enhance and build upon their maturity from a cybersecurity perspective. And then I kind of went off the grid a little bit, because I'm like, well, this is cool, but I really feel like I need to attach a dollar sign to this thing before it really kicks me in the rear. So we partnered up with a group that were doing SOC 2 assessments. And it wasn't really, their framework wasn't necessarily um, built on one specific, whether it's CIS or NIST or
Sure.
anything like that. It was just kind of a general thing. I mean, the SOC 2 assessment, assesses you on certain areas, but within that, you had to meet certain safeguards as well from a
Sure.
technology perspective. So that was kind of the deal that got me rolling. It was really knowing myself, a lack of discipline, not, the time thing, and really just dedicating it and realizing that if I didn't change, that the likelihood of my company actually making it through, the next 10 years or whatever was going to be pretty small, you
So
know?
So that raises a question. So you've been doing this now for, well, you've been engaged in a process of aligning with a framework that it goes back now, what, probably 3 or 4 years, if not
Yeah,
longer.
we're starting kind of like our fifth year in the process. Yeah.
So I get the whole accountability part, and I think that's kind of a great for those listening, like, hey, if you don't have an accountability in place, whether it's through a peer group or you committed the money to do a trust mark or something along those lines, it starts to, if dollars are attached to it, it tends to have a little bit more of a stickiness of I should probably get this done. There's a value proposition, at least, even if it's not a big one. Did you find that the company as a whole at the beginning were they really resistant to this and not wanting to get on board, or was it kind of a collective, like everybody's kind of recognizing like, hey, we've got to do something more than we are today?
Um, so initially I had to get some people that were leaders within my company on board. I had just hired a finance person. And then I had my director of technology and service delivery as well at the time.
Sure.
And I did have to, I mean, initially I just had to tell him I just was flat out point blank. I believe that if we don't take this seriously, that the longevity of this company as it stands is probably pretty short. And going back to the whatever they call it, the 80/20 rule, and
Yeah.
whatever the name they give that,
The
the
80/20 principle.
right, the 80/20 principle. I wanted to be the 20% of
Yeah.
people in our industry that were moving in that direction and kind of leading the charge. And so, I mean, we're a small company and we're 13 employees. When we started this, we were probably 9 employees, right?
Yeah.
Um, and so initially the selling it to those two people was pretty easy because they both were like, well, we love this company and we want to see it, go beyond you someday when you retire or whatever.
Yeah, no one
And
in IT
so
ever retires. Come on, let's be honest. And so then fast forward. So here we are today. You're being assessed for the trust mark. And along this way, did you see a shift? Because one of the things that kind of I've been thinking about, and one of the reasons why I thought it'd be good to talk to you, knowing that we've had some evidence conversations around what you're working on for the trust mark, but it got me
right.
thinking about things like outside of, say, the scope that is the trust mark safeguards, and thinking about things that are more, I don't want to say generic, but like, hey, I have a service ticket. I put my time in, but there's no notes. Like, where's my notes? Like, why did you not put notes in? Oh, I was busy. And it's like, okay, well, what's the ramifications? And so I guess I was drawing these parallels between if you're running an MSP and you're taking seriously the services that you deliver, both internally and to your clients, why would this really be all that different? It's just a different ask, right? Like I think to some extent the reporting might look different, the type of information being tracked might be different, but as far as employees and the human element here, I would think it's the same. Like it's not, this shouldn't be new hat.
Well, from my experience with the conversations that I've had with a number of other MSP owners, um, if you're struggling in the service delivery category, you will struggle in,
Yeah.
meeting a framework. And so, and this
So
kind of
there's a
goes
maturity element here that has to be
back,
considered.
absolutely. So, I mean, 10 years ago is when I really realized that we were not that operationally mature. I mean, we had systems in place and we had, things of that nature, but ultimately I learned to follow the principle of if it's not written down,
Right.
it's not a process.
Right.
Okay.
That's a great way of saying it. So I think to what you just said, if you're listening to this, I think a policy can be in your head. You can execute a process that's in your head and procedures that are in your head. But I would argue that anybody else in your organization, they can potentially understand the policy that's in your head. They're unlikely to follow the procedures the exact same way if it's just in your head.
It's very
Um,
true. I mean, so from that, we learned a lot of things. I mean, initially it was a lot of hard work and
mhm.
a lot of micromanagement, which I don't like. Um,
Micromanaging from a get it done standpoint.
yeah, I think so. Just, basically just following up and checking and making sure that things were being done from a, entering time on tickets,
Yeah,
actually making it to where you can't close a ticket unless there's time entered and notes put in, and, reviewing those things to make sure that they're being done properly, right?
right.
So
Which so that
now
wow. Yeah. Go ahead.
no, I was just going to say, I mean, now it's so ingrained. I mean, any habit that you develop, any skill that you're trying to learn, you put enough time into it, and all of a sudden it becomes more like a routine. It doesn't seem like it's a burden. And
Yeah.
so, and the point of it is that yes, initially following a framework or doing any of that stuff is going to be a burden. It's going to encroach upon your personal time or the time that you think that you have to give someplace else. But once you start doing it, it does become like any other habit in developing, skills. I'm a guitar player. I mean, I didn't just pick it up and start playing. I had to dedicate time to do that. And I think that any of us that own businesses, particularly, the survival instinct needs to kick in a little bit here because, if you want to be at a certain level, operationally mature or security mature or anything else, it's going to take some dedication to do it.
So that kind of leads us into the sort of transition piece of like, as a solution provider, figuring out that if you don't have some maturity in place around service delivery, operations, that it's kind of hard to tackle cybersecurity or really any sort of defined set of safeguards, regardless of what they might be for. They could have a set of safeguards for, how to run your business. I mean, obviously if you're organizationally not looking to improve that process, it's not going to really matter which one you tackle. So I think that makes it very clear, like, hey, get processes in place, get your procedures in place, make sure that everybody in your organization is kind of following that mindset. But then that gets us into this sort of like we've kind of skirted it, like talking about evidence for tickets. But talk to me a little bit about your process, leading up to having evidence for SOC 2 or the trust mark. Like I feel like that's a big shift in the type of evidence that you're now collecting that's a little bit more, there's more effort involved in a lot of cases.
Sure. We were initially it was so overwhelming, man. I think our first process really took about 9 months,
Oof.
right? I mean, from beginning to end, from the time I said we're going to do it, and I wrote the check and and signed the contract to go through the process. I mean, it took 9 months, and part of that was me. Part of it was my lack of wanting to delegate it because I really wanted to absorb as much of it as I could. But I realized about 4.5 months into it that it's not something that I can do on my own, and that I really needed to start engaging the rest of my staff to do this. And so initially, when we did the SOC 2, it was a type 1. We never actually achieved the type 2, though we were prepared to do so, and then decided to move down the Trustmark route with CompTIA. But I think our I wish that evidence collection was a little bit more automated, and I think that's starting to to show up a little bit more.
Sure.
But for us, it was certainly not. I mean, we were logging into 72 different platforms and showing evidence that we had MFA turned on. I
Right.
mean that I
Right.
mean
Definitely
that's a
not centrally managed, right? Like
right. Definitely was not centrally managed. I mean, a lot of that has changed in the last several years for us.
it didn't exist back in
But
the day, right? Like, man, SSO, like we look at the SSO tax website, like, man, some of the websites are some of the vendors who have SSO now, like the cost is prohibitive for a lot of smaller businesses.
it and still is. I
Yeah,
mean, it's like you have to go up to the enterprise level with a minimum of, say a
500
50 user
seats or more. Yeah.
right
50.
buy-in, and you're a company of, I mean, for us 13, right?
Yeah.
Or whatever the case may be. So it is kind of ridiculous. And believe me, I've been making every single one of them that I encounter aware of my displeasure about that. But,
Right, right.
you
I
know.
mean, and I think it comes with some overhead costs that we have to also, I don't want to say appreciate, but we understand based on us going through the steps to secure. It's not so different. So talk to me a little bit about, you were mentioning some of the things that you had to do, MFA, show proof of that. How has that changed? Because one of the things that's really interesting about what you said about like, automated systems. Yes, technology is moving very rapidly. What was very manual 4 or 5 years ago, you can now do a lot of that data collection very fast, whether it's through a PSA or sorry, an RMM or some of those tools that can go and harvest. But I think we're still dealing with that 80/20 rule again, only this is where technology still has the limitations of what it can do from an automation standpoint. It still involves the human element. And I think sometimes we lose sight of tools being able to do all of it. And we get upset when it's only doing like this one small piece. And you're like, yeah, but that one small piece would take you hours if you had to do it manually. So like take the wins where they are. So evidence collection today for you, how has that changed over the course of the last couple of years? Because I mean, evidence maybe was it lighter when you did it the first time, or what was it that they asked for that you thought in the beginning was like, I don't know how we're ever going to collect that evidence, and then today you're like, I'm collecting the evidence. I'm not necessarily writing it the way they want to read it, but we're doing the things we say we're doing.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us it was again back to the processes and everything that we really established during our first assessment. And so,
Got it.
and it just, again, it became a routine. Like, we are not always collecting evidence, but we know where to get the evidence for
Sure.
what we need to do now. So, when we were getting ready to strive for the SOC 2, type 2, the whole deal there is to, prove it over a
A period of
6 to 9
time.
month, yeah, period of time, as opposed to a one point in time,
Yeah, the
right?
snapshots, that's almost I don't want to say it's easier, but like you're only going to be in that spot in time one time anyway,
Right,
no,
exactly.
no matter what you do.
So, a lot of it was like, some of it, especially on the SOC 2 side, it's like, okay, well, we have meetings to review these things, right? And so we formulated templates, started using, 90 for
Yeah,
meeting documentation and minutes and things of that nature that, showed that, hey, we were reviewing these, and we would take screenshots of those reviews and collect them into a place and be done with that. And so that's how it kind of started. Now it's probably very similar to that.
yeah,
I mean, things have changed somewhat, but when we do backup restore testing, not only for our organization, but for every client that we do backup routines for. So on a quarterly basis,
sure.
we go in and do that. We track it, we document it, take the necessary steps.
Resilience, right? You're
Yeah.
adding in, so it's to some extent the whole effort of collecting evidence from an assessment standpoint is really about being able to prove something right now. And where you're at in the path that you're on, correct me if I'm wrong here, is about being able to prove it at any given time because you've asked or you want to look at something and like, because if it fails, then it's failing for everybody.
Right, that's correct. So that's really the approach that I've tried to take. Look, I don't consider myself an assessor, but I try to look at it from that mindset now,
Yeah.
particularly. It's like I'm constantly
What do I
assessing
want to
my
see?
own business.
Yeah. And like what
I'm
that's spot on. I shouldn't have interrupted. You were on something, but I was going to say what you said is something I want to make sure we capture. What I want to see it, right? Like you're saying the thing that I think a lot of organizations are forgetting about, and that is you should be checking all of your systems on a basis that's more frequent than once a year. And I would argue that somewhere between a week and a quarter is going to be based on systems. You know, they may vary. Like I'm not looking like, hey, you should do everything every day. But we have tools now that allow us to do continuous vulnerability scanning. We didn't have that before, man. You were like, dude, I'm gonna run this scan. So like don't try to like run any big jobs on your computer because this scan is gonna literally take all the resources that we have and the internet's gonna be non-existent for like the next hour and a half.
right. Yeah, it is. I mean, literally, that's how it is. So taking an assessment mindset and building some things into your routine. Look, there are some safeguards that we look at way more frequently than others. They're part of a weekly meeting that we have within our organization that we're like, okay, these KPIs that we're looking at to make sure that these things are happening are correct. Whether it's a score that, a particular product gives us on the vulnerability scanning and where
Yeah.
we're at on the remediation plan and things of that nature. So it's really just kind of reviewing the things that we have in place and then the places where we don't have something in place, then saying, okay, well, those we're going to have to take a little bit, whether it's monthly or quarterly or whatever, and have them more on a schedule. And so we have a checklist that that we have to get through
A
every
checklist.
month.
No checklist. I'm just kidding.
Yeah, checklist that we have to get through every month regarding various areas that we are just verifying that the things that we've put in place are continuing to work. And the cool thing is we do that and we find things that are broken and we go
Yeah.
in and fix them. And
And
so,
they
and they're
don't,
not
they just
broken
don't
for
run
very long.
perfectly forever.
Yeah, right.
Well, I mean, I think that's one of the things that we often miss. I mean, the age-old rule of nah, we'll just let it patch it on the next cycle. Um,
Yeah, I mean, you can get
kind of
away with that
amazing.
on some things, but it's really not the way that you should look at.
But if you have a process, right, is kind of your point, right? Like, yeah, I guess I was maybe a little bit over simplifying it. Yeah, if it doesn't patch and it catches it the next time. But I think if you go back in time, I mean, largely we would say, oh, it'll catch the next time. Well, how many times before we proactively go and investigate? Like, is that documented? Is there if any endpoint, goes through three patch cycles or two patch, whatever it is, what's the protocol? And I think it's some of these little things that you've described as part of your process. Maybe we don't call them little things, but I mean, the reality is they all add up to making a resilient environment. And I think that's ultimately the goal here. You didn't start out on a journey like I just want to do SOC 2 just because it was there. We don't know what we don't know. And one of the things that you find out when you go through the trust mark is to do a gap analysis. What are the things that I know I'm doing? What are the things that I know I'm not doing? And what are the things I just genuinely don't understand? And hopefully that comes out with somewhere between a 60-40, 70-30. And it can be either direction. I'm not proposing that everybody's going to be, 70, 80% deployed, but like you have to know where you are to know where you can go.
Yep, absolutely. And understand that it's it's never going to really stop because either I mean, look, the our realm changes so quickly now. I mean, you used to be it's like, oh, well, we've got
What
a
realm
year,
are we in?
you know. Oh man. Just, you know.
Zelda? You're not
Well,
wrong. Like but so yeah, that's a good point. The realm, the world that we live in today, or the realm we live in, depending on what kingdom you're from, you may find that your clients don't deal with some of the things that you are because your clients aren't all in the same vertical or the same industry or targeted by the same, geographic threat actor, whatever, fill in the blank. So Yeah, that's a good point. Like it's always changing. Yeah, and I think we've actually covered evidence quite well. I think we're not telling you what the evidence needs to look like. I think that's up to you as you go through your own process. Jim, what else would you leave our listeners with who are currently, whether they're going after the trust mark or any other framework for their own satisfaction, or they haven't even gone down that path? How would you advise someone as a solution provider, like, hey, what are some of the things you should do first? We're going to assume that you are working towards or have worked through from a business operation standpoint, service delivery standpoint, and now you're trying to enhance your cybersecurity posture. We'll give them that win and just I don't want to say assume because we know what that means, but that they are doing some of those things because I think our listeners are at that level or better.
I think so. And I think from my standpoint, really is just you've got to like when you're digging a hole or you're planting a garden, you got to stick the shovel into the ground, right? Okay. You've got to get started. And like digging a garden or planting a tree or something like that, I mean it's going to make you sweat a little bit. It's
Yeah.
it's it's going to hurt working out. We were
Yeah.
talking about that
Yeah.
before we got on the call. It's like, I mean, it's going to
It,
be hard. It's
yeah.
going to be hard, but it does get easier. And as you realize that, look, I can do this. There are things that I can put in place, and I'm identifying those things as I'm going along, that
Yeah.
as I start going back and taking it from the beginning again, that the next time is going to be easier. And then the next time is going to be easier after that.
That's
And
like if you wait to weed the garden until it's overgrown with weeds, it's going to be backbreaking work. But if you maintain it from the beginning, it can actually be, for some people, enjoyable. I think that's a good way to describe it. I would also add to that, especially with cybersecurity, you don't need to do it all at once. As Mike Stewart says, any forward progress is good progress, and I think that's true. Like you have to start somewhere. Don't try to boil the ocean. Don't try to get all done in one day. It's not going to happen. Don't chat GPT all your policies because then you'll have policies you can't follow. So yeah, I think that pretty much sums it up. For those of you listening, this has been an episode of MSP 1337. Thanks and have a great week.